Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Youth Perspective Podcast. This podcast aims to offer a fresh perspective on misinformation, youth activism, women empowerment in politics, and discuss current political and social trends. We're on Spotify, RSS, SoundCloud, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. My name is Kellor Yde. I'm a program associate at the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, and I am your host for today. This episode is organized by College Youth, the National Democratic Institute, and with support from the Fredrik Naumann Foundation. We are joined today by Jeremiah Tomas and Brigitte Olsen. Jeremiah is a business economics graduate from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He was active in the University Student Council, serving as the Ways and Means Counselor, in which he oversees the income generation and the external relations of the council. Currently, he assumes the role of Student Affairs Coordinator for the youth wing of the Liberal Party of the Philippines. One of his main roles is organizing student-led initiatives as expansions inside various universities. He regularly attends and speaks in workshops, conferences, and seminars. He is also College Youth's Secretary General since 2018. Currently, Jeremiah has been advocating and promoting mental health wellness through the movement Mind Care Club. Brigitte serves as the National Democratic Institute's Director of Political Parties. Born in 1975, she has over 20 years of experience as a leader at the national level in political parties, political leadership, feminism, civil society, and foreign policy. She entered politics formally in 1999 when she was elected president of Liberal Youth of Sweden. In 2002, she was elected as a member of the Swedish Parliament, where she served until 2018, serving in numerous leadership roles, including in the Committee on Foreign Affairs as her party's spokeswoman. Between 2010 and 2014, she was the Swedish Minister for European Affairs and Democracy Issues, serving as a strong international voice on gender equality, democracy, and LGBT rights. She has also been the president of the Women's Wing of the Liberal Party from 2007 to 2010, and founded an independent feminist network, the Lira, in 2003. With those introductions done, I think we're ready to start the conversation. Welcome, Jeremiah. Brigitte, how are you today?
Yes, thank you so much, Kellor. And it's amazing to be here together with you and with our friends from Calde. And for me, it feels a bit like coming home because, as Kellor described, I started my career actually more than 25 years ago. With the Liberal Youth in Sweden, and I was the president for a couple of years. So I've been attending some of the events, meeting inspiring young liberals from Asia, and been in collaboration with them for many years from countries like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and many of the other countries, and of course the Philippines. Sorry, I've caught a cold. It's very rainy here in Stockholm. But it's fantastic to be here. And I also just wanted to start off to just mention that we have work to do when it comes to getting young people active into Asian different political parties, no matter the ideology. And at NDI, we work with all democratic parties, no matter the background, as long as you're democratic. But we have work to do when it comes to getting young people in Asia elected. And I was just checking the statistics. So we know for sure that 50% of the world population are under the age of 30, but only 2.6% of the global MPs in the world are younger than 30. But look upon what's the situation in Asia. In Central Asia, we have 3.18 younger than 30. In South Asia, 2%, Southeast Asia, 1.8%, and East Asia, 0. So I think that hopefully many people, young people that listen to this conversation will do like Jeremiah Thomas and join a political party, and especially use the youth wings as kind of a watchdog on the political parties to act more modern.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. And Jeremiah, would you like to say anything before we get started here today?
I'm very excited and very delighted to be in the presence of I think more prominent liberal parties around the world, NDI. Has been an inspiration when it comes to fighting for liberalism and democracy here in Asia. And with Brigitta's experience of more than 25 years. I think her experience is older than me. I'm just 23 years old, trying to learn a bit about liberalism. And I hope these conversations and our talk here today really creates that impact and that kindling of fire when it comes to fighting for liberalism and democracy here in our side of the world.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. And I have to agree, here at NDI, we're all to varying degrees living in Brigitta's shadow. So excited to be here with you both. All right, well, today's topic focuses on the modern challenges of campaigning, particularly as they relate to the issues of polarization and how that affects young people who are looking to run for office. Now, the rise of polarization and misinformation have been heavily covered around the world, and particularly their influence on political parties in campaigning has continued to grow over the past decade or so. What trends have you two seen in your work in relation to polarization, and how has it affected political parties and young people? And Birgitta, you can go first on this one.
Thank you so much. And I think what we first need to kind of acknowledge when we discuss polarization in the world, that it's a global phenomenon. I mean, it's a situation that we have from Duterte to Orban, from Putin to the Ayatollahs in Iran, in China, and Russia. It's happening all over the world right now. And I think we have just a few years ahead of us when we can stop this very negative headwind that we have. And it's a global trend, but it's also, I think, affecting different nations in a variety of different ways, because some countries are more maybe used to leaders that are using the populistic tools, that are using the very kind of easy sticks when it comes to politics. So they may be more kind of, it's not a big surprise for them when it's happening. But for some other countries, maybe in the Western world, it's more like something coming up, and that has been quite a shock. I mean, we've seen from the European context where I'm from. I'm sitting here in rainy Stockholm right now. We've seen that political parties that are truly populist kind of shape the agenda, and they were not existing in parliament just like 10 years ago, and now they have almost a quarter of the votes in the election. So it's very fast trends. But just connecting a bit to your question, Kellor. What we've seen is that I mean, NDI, we've been working on this in countries like Turkey, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and quite many others, Yemen too. But what we've seen is the need to have kind of our own kind of defense system to build them, and that's what I think is kind of key. And there we have coalition-based governments and coalitions in parliament, where decent political parties that do believe in democracy and freedom can join up together. And that's something that we need to emphasize more in the coming years. We might have different opinions about economy. We might have different opinions about quite a variety of different things. But when it comes to defending democracy, we need to unite together. So that's also something that's interesting. And as I mentioned, then the IB bring political partners together, no matter their background, if they're democratically committed, to build trust. And multi-partisan system is also key here, as I mentioned. And before I give the floor to Jeremiah Thomas, I also wanted to highlight that I think that the young generation is extra important here, because if you're not a bit idealistic when you're young and believing in strong values, you will never be that when you're getting older. So that's why I think it's so important that decent democratic political parties are more inclusive when it comes to young people and women and different minorities, and that's also a struggle that we think is important.
So,
and what is your take on this?
Yes, Thomas? Thank you so much, Brigitte. Please, Jeremiah, join in.
Well, for me, I haven't had that much experience, I guess, but then seeing the past few years, one of the things that affected the way politics work in in the Philippines and in some of the Asian countries is the rise of social media. So when it comes to these tools such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all of these other tech-based companies, I think in a way it democratizes information and power. And in the Philippines, the penetration rate of cellular phones and access to these kinds of applications is around roughly 75% or even higher, which has an unprecedented scale when it comes to informing the public about all of these things. What I'm really curious about is when it comes to polarization, in your experience, Brigitte, has there been a time where it was just like this, wherein we see for example, in Thailand, we have the yellow shirts and the red shirts. In the Philippines, we have what you call Dilawan and DDS. So these are these were brought about by the people in power and in position because of the constant badgering, the constant labeling, and the belittling that the current administration has in these respective countries. The opposition was labeled or demonized, and we were constantly bashed, and we were constantly labeled as so and so, and that created this what do you call that? That created this atmosphere wherein it was not conducive to conversation. It was, this is my view, that is your view, and then from there it changed into, this is who I am, and that is what you are, and I don't like you. So in some way, there's the room for growth, the room for talking about these things and growing together was cut short. And has that been prevalent in your time, even without social media?
I think you are raising a very important question, and also one thing that is relevant also to the work that we do at NDI, and that's also to create spaces for political parties, no matter if they belong to the governmental parties or to the opposition, to discuss political issues in a serious way. Because sometimes, I mean, we know when we have a populist climate and politicians very often would like to take the easy way out with short messages that fit into social media, to the Twitter kind of format, and so on. And especially if it's polarized, and especially if you're opposition in a country where you've had a very authoritarian leadership that might dominate the public service, that might dominate the social media channels, that might dominate the whole kind of public media climate, then it creates a lot of frustration. I can totally relate to that when it comes to your campaigning and to election preparation and so on. But what we have been trying to do, that also in harsh climates, I'm not going to mention countries here, but also in harsh climates, is to try to create spaces where people could meet. And sometimes it's not like I'm talking about public meetings or media things or so on, but also create safe spaces where people from government, if they're willing, to discuss with opposition and vice versa. So that's something that I think that is kind of one solution, because then the participants are kind of the owners of the conversation, and it's not for the media or for the votes. It's more like trying to identify what people have in common. But I know it's very hard. It's very hard when you when you work in a climate when it's not a kind of fully mature democracy, then it's much harder. But also, I'm always very optimistic, even in the countries where you have the toughest kind of fundamentalist regimes and no democracy have ever experienced democracy. I'm always positive that you can identify agents of change in the system that you could work with, or that you could kind of change. So I think that's awesome. We need to be.
How do you identify those things? I mean, because I'm really interested in how other countries were able to do it. In the Philippines, our election is actually next year, so it's something that we're really concerned about, and it really is sickening that this matter of polarization, especially in the youth, it creates that divide. People who were once friends on Facebook now blocks each other and destroys friendship just because of all of these misunderstandings and political issues, which I think is a pressing concern for the youth today.
I think no, it's also very relevant to racing, and I think sometimes during such issues, I've been following the Philippines for many years, and so on, and I really know the context that you're working from, but sometimes then you need to try to have like game changers in the debate. And also we know that storytelling and owning kind of the story that people are talking about, and I mean, I've been visiting the Philippines myself. I've seen the results of the current leadership. I've seen the frustrations. I've met the civil society leaders from a variety of different situations and so on. So I think also to pick up stories that are relevant for people and try to create strong political messages out of that, to kind of create a counter, not a counter attack, but a kind of a countering story. I think that's very key to try to do that during such kind of circumstances that you and other work from. It's not always easy to have like the kumbaya that you could sit together and then you can discuss. I think it was like Indira Gandhi that once said, you cannot shake your hand with someone whose fist is kind of like this. But try to identify, because I think also in such systems you have people that are not fully 100% supporting the current regime or so on. But that's a long-term perspective. You need to work very long. You need to know people. You need to establish relations. You need to figure out ways out for people to take another choice.
If I may, Jeremiah, I know at NDI we don't have the perfect solution to this question. It's a massive issue, but something we do in our programming quite a bit is work through youth to bring political parties together. And I think as the Secretary General of Called Youth, you are in a great position to tackle these issues as an organization, because we find bringing together young politicians when they're starting out their careers and having them work together across party lines tends to build sort of those lasting relationships that will carry on when those younger politicians become leaders, become MPs, and hold office. That's just a perspective that we have found successful, although just like Brigitte said, of course, it is a long-term perspective. But
yeah. And also, just to build short on what Kellor just mentioned, I've been very inspired myself when I've had a conversation with the different political youth organizations that we have to the big party internationals in the world. I mean, I obviously know IFRI well, and Amanda Kanage, I've known her since many years back. But what I find is so interesting right now, as Kellor also touched upon, is that and this wasn't possible 10 or 5 years ago, that among the youth leaders of the political youth organizations, it's a lot of interest to do joint programs together right now. So I think also you can take your source from democratically committed parts in your own family, in your own ideological family from around the world by attending IFRI in your case. But I think also you can do that by kind of widening that scope and meeting also from other people that may share the same experience or have the same kind of background. So I think that's also, they have a bigger kind of background to work on.
Great. Well, with that said, let's take into consideration how polarization has been impacting elections and campaigns. As you mentioned, Jeremiah, in the Philippines, for example, and talk a little bit about what parties can do to protect their candidates and encourage young politicians, young leaders, young activists to run for office. What can be done to address this issue, and what has NDI been doing, which I think we've touched on briefly already. But I'll let you start this one, Jeremiah, if you'd like.
So that's also one of the questions we have for CAD. What we try to do, I think, is to at least get these leaders from the Asian countries together, to come together to share their ideas, looking at it in such a way that one country who experiences fake news, for example, Taiwan, back in 18 conference, that delegate from Taiwan already discussed what they were trying to do when it comes to the misinformation in their country. And they were actually successful fighting misinformation and the polarization. But then when it came to the Philippines, when we tried to apply the same technique, I think we fell short last 2019 for elections. And I think that's something that has been bogging us down for the longest time, because here comes another elections. The way we would want to move forward is, of course, to have more youth join us. But then, because of the polarization that's happening, because of the labeling, because of the political dirt they throw at us, there's a lot more people who are skeptical about being called liberals joining our party, and that has been a constant concern. I'm particularly interested in what other countries have done. Do we need to change our color? Do we need to change our name, to change the branding, or do we just have to stand with what we are, accept it, and move forward, so that they could see and we could prove to them that we're more than what they say?
A very relevant. Yeah, a very relevant question. I think one thing that I always advise political parties when it comes to disinformation is to first to do their own homework, because then you're so much better protected. And that's, all about, investing in cybersecurity, smart online strategies for campaigns. And I think also, by you being part of the Kellor Yde and being part of connected to Liberal International and to IFRI and others, you also have your networks to help you with this, that could give you good advices on that. So that's a very important, to do your homework. That would be my first advice. And then, as a feminist, I also would like to highlight, because we also have the gendered disinformation. We know that especially female politicians and young politicians, female politicians, have a very hard situation when it comes to threats via internet and disinformation and so on. So that's also, that could include threats, misleading insults and so on, harassment campaigns and so on. Fabricated rumors, stories. We've seen it in all parts, in the West, in the North, in the South, in the East. So that's also something that we found that we also need to have a feminist awareness around this. And we've been working, for example, in countries like Indonesia, highlighting this to prepare women that are running. It's like a gender and disinformation guide tool that we have. But also, it's far tougher, as you described, when you are in a situation when your counterpart, when your opponent is controlling so much of the social media structures and the what is in the classic old school media too. But also, one third thing would be also to be kind of creative. I've seen campaigns sometimes from political parties that do work in a very tough context, when you can kind of turn a way around, when people are misleading and pretending that your political party has some kind of absurd opinion that you're not carrying, but then to almost like make a joke out of it, to try to change the story that people are discussing, have that twist.
If I may ask, what do we do about, for example, how do we strengthen the ideology, the way people have ground when it comes to believing in the party ideology? Because I'm not that familiar with other countries outside of Asia, but there is a sense of personality politics where we're from. And it's really hard to be in that situation, because we have people joining us and then shifting to the next party after the elections. Whoever wins the presidential seat, whoever wins the most number of the congressmen, just shift the party. And it really is problem when it comes to standing your ground, because all of these politicians, we have, to some extent, I don't think they have principle. And how do we develop that kind of leadership wherein you have your boundaries and you have the things that you fight for? Because without the principle, I think it's very problematic, because it trickles down to how you do your policies, how you think about certain issues, and you just don't think about what's best for the country, but what favors you or the one in the presidential seat.
Actually, this morning, I was part of this conversation with former prime ministers and presidents, and we discussed leadership. And it was interesting. One researcher said that, I mean, everyone is, not everyone, but many people are admiring Angela Merkel, and now she's leaving office and everything, because she has been such a strong European leader. And then another researcher said, well, she might be very popular in Germany, but she could never be elected as the president in the United States, because then you need to be another type of leader. You need to be more extrovert. You need to be more flamboyant. You need to be more yeah, you know what I mean. You need to be another type of character. You cannot be like the shy person. You need to be like, yeah, like almost like a show person. So I think that's also interesting to see that different nations tend to breed different types of politicians. But what is important for all politicians, no matter if they have like a strong classical ideological background, or if they are more built on other backgrounds, I would say, I mean, that democracy, we need to deliver. And that's maybe the problem right now. And connecting to that, I think also, I mean, it's not always easy, and in some countries, ideology and if you're right, if you're to the left, or if you're at the center, it's very kind of crucial to your identity. In some other countries, it's not. But then you need to frame your messages. I mean, if it's around freedom or liberty or individual rights, or what it is, kind of your create your passion, you need to build your political proposals around that. And I think if you continue to do that, people will kind of recognize your party. And just to quote Hans van Balen, who passed away early this year, who was a strong leader in Europe, he once said, if people do not recognize your party, they will not vote for you. So I think sometimes the kind of the party shopping that some politicians are doing, they join one party because they want to have a career, and then they go to another one. In the long run, I don't think it's successful. And I think that many voters could kind of see through that kind of behavior. So I think it's always better. And that I learned from my own years in politics, that to kind of stick to your values, because then you have the voters coming and voting for you every single election, and you build on your trust. You have a more kind of solid thing. And I know it's hard and it's different in different, I mean, traditions and cultures, what is emphasized, but I think that's still the right way to do. And one final thing here is that, and especially if you're a young politician yourself, and you're leading young liberals in Asia, I think it's important also to have a very hopeful view on the future, because what makes people disappointed in most countries is that when they're not feeling that their children or grandchildren will have a better future, but they're feeling that the economy is going down, it will be less liberty, it will be a tougher situation. So you need to have something for people to look forward to, not like dream society or so on, but just like paving the way for something better. I think that's extremely important. And politicians right now are just painting the world in very gloomy colors. I think a lot of people are longing for something else.
To quickly add to Brigitta's point, Jeremiah, this trend you're describing in Asia of personalized politics and what we're calling non-issue based politics is definitely not just a regional one. It's one we see in all around the world in the countries NDI works in. Our team actually recently released some research examining exactly this issue, which is how can we work with our partners, political parties, and how can citizens work with parties to persuade them to be more issue focused, or focused on policies and positions as opposed to having your strong personalities. which certainly that is important as well in some contexts. But the ultimate goal, I think, when we're working with our partners is to encourage them to focus on real policy issues that will benefit their constituents. And what we found is, a variety of things, but partnering political parties with civil society, for example, for youth activists, will sort of encourage them to focus more on policy issues and will hold them accountable if they don't. And sort of doing these sort of community-based interventions, like say anti-vote buying campaigns, for example, can really push parties to focus on the issues as opposed to, just electing personalities over and over again, as you mentioned. But certainly it is a challenging issue and one we're still working on.
Well, yeah, I would agree that it's something we still have to constantly learn from, and I'm really appreciative of the platform that we're having here today to be able to hear about all of these things. Because in the Philippines, if you're an actor, if you're a singer, if you're a boxer, you're a politician, and that isn't really. I don't really think that that's the type of politics that we'd want, because the interests of the people aren't what's given focus, and it's more of the interests of the politician. At the same time, with the weak political parties, we also have weak institutions. We have over 200 different political parties in our Congress, which is very problematic. Maybe one of the reasons is funding. I don't know if that is the reason, because it's not like other countries like Thailand or in the States, that if your party gets these number of seats, then they have this budget to run on. It's basically political parties here are just vehicles for people to run under. There's no machinery, and there's not really any base for all of the parties except for maybe a few. And hopefully someday we progress to the point where we get to elect the right leaders, given any financial status or any position, as long as we see that they are the best for the position. The party gets to make them win in their respective positions.
That's a good point. Brigitte, if you have any comments, feel free, but otherwise I can bring us to our next question here, which is sort of building on the things we've discussed today. We've talked about polarization, we've talked about disinformation, we've talked about ideology, personality-driven politics. Let's contextualize these topics. What does this mean for a young person interested in running for office? How I would love to hear your perspective, Jeremiah, on what, if you're considering running for leadership in your political party or running for office one day. What do you think about these issues, and how do you think they'll affect your candidacy? And from Brigitte's perspective, what is NDI doing to help young people address these things and build sort of their personal skills and leadership capacity?
Well, in the Philippines, if given the chance, and if I'm best fit for the position, I think I'd run. But the concern I would have is that I'm not from a political family. I might not have the machinery behind me. I might not have the money to run. And hopefully that's something we're trying to change with CAL, as well as with liberal youth, building upon the individuals, building the network, building the machinery through the grassroots movement that we have. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to back people up regardless of their status, regardless of who they are, where they come from, and elect them to the positions because they deserve it, because they're the best fit for those positions. They're the ones who would best represent the community. And I wish I'd see that in my lifetime, or be able to have that chance here in the Philippines. But I think in Tagalog we say kahit papaano. In English, I think that would roughly translate into just a bit. Even with all the odds, we could do it just a bit. So with that in mind, I think Brigitte was right that we just have to keep our idealism up and just continue to fight for what we're fighting. And it really helps to have the network that we have. And I think once you immerse yourself in the type of ideology that you'd want to have, when you converse with people, when you engage in debates with them and strengthen your understanding and foundation of things, that's when you begin to realize that it's not only something that you live by each day, it's something that you'd want to see other people having. It's something that you want other people to have as well. When it comes to the strong institutions, democracy, the true democracy that we wish to have in the Philippines.
And what you just mentioned is, I think, one of your key strengths, and that's the grassroots campaigning, because you can have a fantastic, strong grassroots campaign about social injustice. It could be it could be human rights violations. It could be so many different gender. It could be minority rights or whatsoever. But if you have a very strong kind of political issue, you do not need to have a single dime or dollar. You could be extremely successful. I know it's hard, but sometimes that could be kind of the social movement of society if you are the driving force, the drive for democracy or the drive for liberty or freedom or so. So I think that's important. But what we do at NDI, I mean, of course, we work. I mean, our team works a lot directly with political parties to work on inclusion. And I always tell it's for political parties like reform or die. If you're not involving the young people, you're not attracting the future, and then you will have no voters. So it's extremely important, because in many countries, people tend to stick to the party that they're voting for when they're young. Not in all countries, but it's a lot about identity. So if you are future oriented as a political party, and if you could relate to the things that young people are concerned around, it could be around climate change or democracy or other things, then you're more relevant for the young people. So we work directly with political parties, and we've had programs through the years in like all, I would say almost like all countries that we work with. We've had different programs about political party leadership, about I always say to parties, win with integrity but lose with grace. To also to see how young people could be involved in that. But it's important to also, yes, not only concentrate, because not all young people are like I was, or like you are, joining a political party when we're young. I mean, most do not do that. So it's also important to look upon the civil society and where are young people in society. I was very happy when I was a politician myself, for example, when some of the teen magazines did reach out to me to ask me questions about sexual harassments in school. Or so I thought that was like my best audience, because then I could discuss with a very often a very young female audience about things that were so relevant to them and what I was doing in Parliament to change that reality. And also another thing that has been very successful for us is also different virtual debates that we've been arranging to discuss different public policy issues. We've had these debates in countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Libya, and others, countries that do face a lot of challenges related to democracy, and it's different debates, finales, and so on. So that's also that could also be different kind of tools that could use. And also one final thing that we've been mentioning, we believe a lot when it comes to believing in cross-party work. And I think especially when we're living in the situation right now with the rising populism, and we're in the 15th consecutive year of decline in democracy in the world, according to Freedom House. We need to have the decent political parties joining up together. And here the youth are so important.
Great. Thank you so much, Brigitte. It sounds like that cross-party work is definitely a huge factor for feeling partisan divides from our perspective. But ultimately, looking at the reality of the situation, Brigitte, earlier on the recording, you mentioned some unfortunate numbers about how low the youth percentage is in parliaments in Asia. And I can confirm that we see similar trends all around the world. And so I guess my next question would be for both of you, what sort of initiatives are NDI and CALD doing to tackle this issue, essentially, to help young people run for office, to help young people get involved in politics without having, the money, as Jeremiah mentioned, or the political connections, because ultimately, without recruiting new young people into the party landscape, as you said, Brigitte, those are the future of politics in those countries. So I'll let you start, Brigitte, on this one.
First, it's all about creating platforms for young people inside political parties. So one of our key programs right now is around Women with Integrity, about political party integrity, and that's inclusion is one of the key parts of that program. So that's one thing, to try to create platforms. And I'm not now talking about meaningful platforms. Sometimes political parties may be interested to have young people, joining before the elections, being like campaign workers, but not on the list. And we think it should be meaningful power. So that's one of the things that we have been focusing on. And I also hear we were discussing about trends when it comes to young people in parliament, elected officials. I think one tool that has been very successfully worldwide, at least where I come from, is the political party youthing organizations. There is a reason why we have so many young people in the Scandinavian parliaments. And one of the reasons is that we have very active political youthing organizations that are also quite independent, and that are acting as watchdogs to the parties. I read an article in the newspaper today when one of the young female leaders of one of the political youthing organizations said that the leader of her party had no ideology, was kind of lost out of touch to the ideology, or so. Was very hard language. And she can do that because that's kind of her role, criticizing the party that is in a tough situation right now. So I think that also creates a lot of strength. So that's also one tool that we try to emphasize. And then, of course, all the work that we're doing, trying to develop leadership skills for young people that are interested into politics, no matter if they're inside a political party already or if they're part of a civil society organization. We've been doing that in a lot of countries in the region, in Papua New Guinea, Sri Lanka, Nepal, the Philippines, and others. So that's also important.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
So maybe learning from NDI and from the in Germany, we also have what we call the CALD Youth Political Academy. It's where we invite young MPs, young political leaders from the various parties in Asia. And we come together and have a sharing session, have this training when it comes to different types of issues. We've had trainings on how to fight disinformation, given by one of the most distinguished members of the cabinet in Taiwan, or the Tang. And we've also gotten Kun Avisit, the previous Prime Minister of Thailand, to come and speak with us and discuss about these things. And I think it starts from there. It starts from the conversations. It starts from the friendships. And as we go by each day, supporting each other in our various fights in our localities, it starts from there, when we could see that we could draw strength from each other, not only in our own countries, but in the region and in the world as well. We've been invited to IFLRI to join them and participate, and it's been very insightful, because that gives us the sense of relief, that knowing that we're not alone in our fight against authoritarianism and all of these things badgering Asia. And I think throughout the years, all eyes has been on our region, particularly because of all of the attacks on democracy, the constant attacks that are here, and I think that's where we need to draw strength from our partners abroad. If we can find it here in the Philippines or in Asia, then we find it in America or in Europe, and we continue the fight each day. It is tiring, it is stressful. We're betting our lives, we're betting our reputations to fight for liberalism and democracy in the region, and it is fulfilling to see the fight continuing. Because just to share, maybe 3 years ago, there were only 5 of us in the Philippines, members of the liberal youth. Now we're at least in the hundreds, and slowly growing. So that's something to be thankful for as well.
It's very impressive, Jeremiah. And it's an important fight indeed. And one, organizations like NBI, it's up to us to step up and give you that support that you mentioned. So with that said, as we come to the end of our session today, I want to give you all an opportunity to sort of reflect on our conversation and close out the conversation with any advice you would have for young people moving forward, particularly as they run for office, but really in any aspect of navigating political life, and any other concluding remarks you might have, any bits of wisdom you'd like to share. You can start if you'd like this time, Jeremiah.
Maybe to my fellow youth, let us not lose hope in the battle. I think everything is happening for a reason and in its own time. This time we're being attacked, we're being constantly threatened by all of these issues and problems, but there's a lot of things that we can learn, and it builds character, it builds our strength, and it builds the belief in the ideology that we have. And victories are sweeter if the fight is harder. So I think that's something to be happy about, and I'm really thankful for the discussion and seeing Brigitte, who has been fighting for democracy for most of her life. If it's something that I could live up to, then I think that would be a worthwhile fight and worthwhile life.
Yeah, soon enough, Jeremiah, you'll be on the other side of the podcast table. I look forward to returning one day for that. Brigitte, please go ahead, share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah, for your kind words. And yes, to allude what you just said, be optimistic. Remember that you're on the right side of history, and never lose your hope. I think that's extremely important. And then, as I always say to NDI, and I think it's very relevant right now when the half of the world population are running to the cinemas watching the new James Bond movie. I'm always saying, to paraphrase James Bond, democracy might be shaken but not stirred. I think it's important to see that. I mean, we know that democracy has been shaken during the last years, but not deeply enough to kind of change our behavior, our way of thinking. So I think that's so important to keep that torch alive for all of us that do believe that the world is full of freedom and democracy is going to happen in all countries in the coming years.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation we've had today. I think we have a great perspective on the issues affecting youth and what young people can do in the future. See you again next time.